emotional intelligence, or EQ. I'm Jen Shirkani, and I'm being joined by my colleague and business partner, Steve Friedline. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Jen.
Thanks for joining today.
Glad to be here.
Just to give you a little background, Steve and I are both part of the Penumbra group, and we provide support for organizations in the talent management space, which means we provide feedback to those who really need to hear it. We assess employee coachability. We provide assessments and workshops, and we really specialize in the application of emotional intelligence. We've spent many, many years in this behavioral science and applied it to selection, retention, motivating employees, and development of the workforce. We specialize in EQ assessments and coaching and provide leadership development to organizations of all sizes across actually the world now. I was going to say across the country, but we're actually around the world now, huh, Steve?
Exactly.
So part of the reason why we have specialized in this topic is because we feel very passionate about the value of applying emotional intelligence in every single role. It's applicable, I think, to every employee out there. It's definitely beneficial in the personal space, but definitely in the professional space. And one of the things that we've noticed and why I think this is such a relevant topic is so often it isn't someone's technical expertise that determines whether they will be successful in the workplace or in a role. It's so much more about how they manage their own behaviors and how they interact with others. And I know, Steve, you've also had some personal experience with this too.
Exactly, Jen. This brings to mind an experience I had with two very knowledgeable software specialists who worked at an accounting firm. And, it wasn't so much about how much they knew, it was about their ability to relate their knowledge to the people around them. They were both seen as technical experts, but when employees were in need of desktop support, they always called on one person in particular. His name was JD. And the other support person, Frank, basically only got calls when JD wasn't available, or if they had to resolve something immediately and there was a crisis. So it kind of makes you wonder, okay, why is that the case? And how does it relate to what we're talking about here? Well, even though both of these people were very well trained and highly skilled in their areas of expertise, the way they processed their service was very different. Frank, the rarely called upon Frank, would respond immediately to calls for assistance, which was a good thing. So he'd go in, fix the issue, go away, supposedly problem solved, right? Well, not necessarily. And here's the difference. JD, on the other hand, would explain his solutions to his customers. His goal was to help people feel more confident and more self-reliant. So basically, he was seen as a solution provider, not just a subject matter expert. So I think the basis of what we're saying here is if we want our technical skills to be appreciated, we've got to be willing to adjust our style to accommodate the needs of the people around us. And I think, Jen, when we do, it becomes a mutual benefit. And this, to me, is an example of how well-managed relationships can lead us to a greater level of personal and professional success.
That's a great example. And I think very common no matter what the technical expertise is, because I see it happen with those that are experts in law, in medicine, in other fields, not just technology.
Exactly. So, and I think so oftentimes we think of frustration that we experience when interacting with others when their focus seems to be strictly on themselves and not necessarily in tune with our needs.
Correct. And that's why this whole science becomes so relevant. And just to define, when we say emotional intelligence, we are talking about three main components. And the first one is their ability or your ability to recognize yourself. So knowing sort of who you are, how you're wired in a way, how your behavior might be impacting the people around you. It's also the ability to read people and situations accurately. So in your example with the more socially skilled IT person, they were able to sort of read the audience and know how technical that person might be or what maybe their real need was, even if they couldn't communicate it effectively. And then be able to respond, right? Provide a unique response and approach each person as an individual instead of taking a one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. And I think it's the combination of those three. It's one thing to be able to read the situation, but it's another thing to adjust our response. And I think that's the blend of those skills that really give us the ability to become more emotionally intelligent.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what it is and what it's not. And to start with, I guess we could also sort of give you a little background on, I mentioned earlier, this is something that we focus on at our firm on helping people in the workplace increase, but this is a sort of life beneficial skill set. And it makes sense, right? If you think about it, if I'm better at reading my audience and responding appropriately at work, and I transfer those skills to home, everyone at home is going to like me a lot more.
Yes.
What's surprising, though, to a lot of people, it is not higher in general in women versus men. And I think a lot of people just assume that we are more either emotionally connected or insightful or comfortable with emotion. But in studies where they've actually done assessments, they can measure EQ, they're seeing very little overall difference between the genders, which I think is a surprise. Wouldn't you agree?
I absolutely agree, and I'm relieved to hear that, actually. but I think what's significant here is anytime we generalize about groups of people, whether it's on the subject of emotional intelligence or any number of other things, I think we lose our insight in terms of really identifying the individual needs of people, which certainly gender is one part of that, but certainly not the overall picture where EQ is concerned or with respect to so many other things.
Yeah, I agree. And even though we start to develop these skills, it's still something that we choose to use or not use. It's not like you just have it or you don't have it. It is an option, and we sometimes decide if we think the audience is almost worthy of our effort. And you'll see people who will sort of turn it on, as it were, to a boss or to a customer, but then turn it off when they're with their team or colleagues.
Right. And I think the danger here is that's very obvious to the people around you if you're choosing to use or not use those skills. And once again, ties very directly into credibility.
Now, it's also not always positively correlated with high IQ, meaning the higher your IQ, the higher your EQ. They are completely independent. I think I read one study actually that at the highest levels of IQ, there's an inverse correlation. And I think that show, The Big Bang Theory, is such a great example.
Yes. I totally agree.
The good news. The good news about EQ is that this is something that does increase as you get older. So you get a little credit for time on the planet. Hopefully you get to know yourself better. You get to learn what works and doesn't work with other people. So you get a little benefit with maturity, but you can certainly accelerate the increase. And then at some point,
yep. Choose not to. And I think it ties in very directly with the one right above it, choosing to use or not use. And I think as we get older, that may very well be correlated to whether or not we want to bother with the time necessary in order to utilize those skills.
And partly why this nickname, a lot of people ask why emotional intelligence has EQ for the nickname, is because this is a fairly young behavioral science. It was not discovered in the 1950s or even the 1960s. The early research started in the 70s and then was heavily documented in the 80s. And it was a connection between resiliency and EQ. And what the research has shown is that people who are able to withstand setbacks and go through hard times, but still sort of recover, bounce back, move on, have higher EQ, an emotional quotient. And so that's where that nickname all started. If you have never heard of this science before, you're not alone, because this is a very young area of study within human behavior.
You know, we've talked a little bit about the fact that when we use our EQ skills, it can be a very positive thing for the people around us. But I think maybe we should talk a little bit about how having EQ and developing our EQ can really relate to higher earnings and our ability to be more effective on the job.
And this is not a small number, is it? To me,
Indeed.
this is a big number. So I think in the early days, and Steve, you and I have both been in the industry long enough that we were always sort of labeled as soft skills, development training people.
Right.
And this was a nice to have or an extra in a leadership development or employee development program. But we're seeing now there's very tangible benefits to increasing EQ. One of them is income.
Indeed it is. And I think there's more and more information out there. I was reading an article on Harvard Business Review not long ago that directly correlated effectiveness in leadership with respect to emotional intelligence.
Yeah, we're getting lots more information out there and documented evidence of this. So this quote on the right side comes from an article called "What Makes a Leader," and it's from the Harvard Business Review. So this could be the one you're referring to, where it's definitely showing up as a almost differentiator. I think at some point, education level might be the same. Even years of experience in the industry might be the same between people. In your example with your two IT people, right? They're on paper, they look very,
Yes.
very similar. But there was a very big difference in how they were seen by their organization based on none of the things that were on paper.
Right.
So let's take these pieces and skills and break them down a little bit more. And let's talk about that first R in the definition, recognizing yourself. So when we talk about recognition, this is all about self-awareness, knowing who you are. We really like to encourage people to start here. If you've never really looked at EQ or done anything to help yourself in this area, one of the first things to do is sort of baseline where you are now and have some self-awareness around what is your behavioral pattern. What are some of the things that are strengths, and what are some things that people might see as weaknesses? And you can do this in a variety of ways. There are lots of tools out there that can help you start this process. Everything from a communication style assessment, which some of the more popular ones are social styles or DISC. You could take a personality assessment. The most popular one out there is a Myers-Briggs or MBTI. So there's a variety of tools that you can take to start looking at your traits, and then also, of course, self-reflection, ways to kind of see yourself from the perspective of others, and how does your behavior, regardless of your good intention, which we all have, how does that impact the people around you? So that whole concept of social self-awareness. Now, I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to reflect right now with a short self-assessment. And as we go through the remainder of these skills, you'll have a chance to kind of answer some questions for yourself. The first one I'm going to ask you is, when someone makes comments to me about how to improve, think about your most often response. What do you do maybe most consistently? Not necessarily all the time, but more of the time. Do you A, weigh the information you've received in the past to see whether or not it aligns? B, appreciate the fact they're being candid with me, because it's naturally difficult to give people feedback, especially if it happens to be a boss or somebody higher up in the organization. Or C, encourage them to share more details so you can thoroughly understand their perspective. Now, not all of these are bad, right?
Right. And as I look at them, Jen, I think, what is the response I think is the best response, or what's the response I most consistently do when a situation like this comes up?
Mm-hmm. That's the goal, right? Just to try and be honest No one
Right.
will know what you think, what you say. So um, we won't tell on you. But out of these three, I think there's one that's a little more emotionally intelligent, and that would be C. The goal when someone gives you feedback, especially something you maybe weren't expecting to hear or don't even agree with right away, is instead of either defending yourself or trying to end the conversation, be able to really ask enough details so you can get an understanding of exactly what they're saying. And I think being able to have them connect the dots for you between, give me an example of a time when you saw me do XYZ will help you also understand where perception comes from. Now, of course, hearing feedback isn't the only piece of this self-awareness, because Steve, you and I both have worked with people that might be great at hearing feedback, right?
Exactly.
But don't actually do anything with that feedback.
And you know what? It's almost more dangerous to accept that feedback and be appreciative of the fact that the person is sharing, but then doing nothing with it. And I think that's one of the biggest pitfalls that we fall into where feedback is concerned, is to what extent am I not only listening to what people have to say, but how am I responding? How am I adjusting my response now based upon what I've learned from them?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so let's look at the second R, reading others, which is the skill of empathy. And again, this is something you can learn. People can, reading others, it's not just I feel your pain, right?
Exactly. This is more about my willingness to consider the other person's perspective, to thoughtfully respond based upon what I'm seeing within the other person. I think so oftentimes this, you mentioned soft skills earlier, and I think empathy is really one of those skills that gets a bad rap because of what you just said. It's not just about understanding how the other person is feeling, but really trying to consider their perspective, to read not only what they're saying, but also their nonverbals. So let's take a look at another self-assessment question here on the subject of empathy. When I'm trying to understand the way another person is feeling, I go with my gut. I can read others quickly based on my experience. And I think we do this a lot of times during employment interviews where we might make a quick assessment in terms of where a person is coming from. B, I put myself in their shoes until I agree with their perspective. And then C as the final choice, I ask a lot of questions and read their nonverbal messages.
Hmm.
Again, three distinct choices here in terms of what empathy really means in terms of a solid emotional intelligence choice. I look particularly at B and I think, you know what? Is empathy, Jen, really about agreeing with the other person's perspective?
Yeah, I know it's hard, isn't it? And there are times I certainly see people who might be upset over something, and I'm thinking to myself, "Are you kidding me? This is what
Right,
we're going to get upset about today, right?"
right.
It's hard in some cases, almost impossible for me to agree with every other perspective
Yep,
out there. But if I can understand why to them they
right.
have that perspective or why they are getting upset over something, that really helps me better work through it.
Right. And I mentioned the gut feeling piece, but I think what's more important there is that last phrase, based on my experience. If I'm really truly trying to empathize with someone else, I'm seeking an understanding of their experience. So I'm going to go with C here. I think it's important to ask for more information and then not only to listen to what they have to say, but also read into what they're not saying, because oftentimes that's probably the most important part of the message.
Absolutely. Now, you can see here these first two are a lot more kind of passive in a way, where to recognize and read, I'm not taking action yet. I'm sizing up the situation. I'm collecting data and information so then I can respond in an appropriate way that's very
Right.
thoughtful or mindful, right?
Right.
So this is
Exactly.
the skill of self-control. Not always easy to do.
Often not easy. And I think one of the dangers here is sometimes we skip that empathy and reading piece and move right into respond, and that's when self-control gets completely out of alignment.
Yes. And you've all met people with lower self control, right? So, examples of lower self control might be people who can't stop talking once they start. They might be heavily impulsive or impatient with others. They might have problems managing their emotional responses where they might get angry easily or agitated or even cry. Those are all examples of low self control. So, time to test yourself on this one. Here's your question. When others around me are agitated or upset, A, I match their level of emotional intensity verbally and non-verbally. B, I always stay calm and collected. Or C, I have a hard time controlling my reactions, maybe especially when someone is challenging me. Now,
These are really distinctively different responses, Jen. I mean, immediately I go to okay, maybe I should stay calm and collected here. Maybe that's my self-control, making sure that I don't overreact and may want to stay calm and collected, but maybe a little too much. Not sure that's the best answer, although it may be what I do on fairly regular occasions.
well, yeah, I think there is some logic in that. I think a lot of people want to stay calm when someone else is upset because they figure I'll only escalate the situation if I, match their intensity. But actually, if you think about it, the person who never shows any emotional range is not really showing any emotional intelligence either. So if I can't read you because you're always so calm, you're denying me the ability to use my EQ.
Right. Right. So there's a definite need, as I'm looking at these responses with respect to A, it's not that I'm going to necessarily share the same emotion with the other person, but I like that matching the intensity piece, letting them know that I really do understand where they're coming from, and giving them some eye contact and some initiative to let them know that, you know what, if this is an issue with you, I want to hear more about it, and I want to get some clarity in terms of what you're dealing with and where you're coming from.
Yeah, I agree. I think even so much as if somebody is sitting right at, facing you and looking you straight in the eye, being able to turn around and look them straight in the eye, right there alone tells them, I'm with you, I'm hearing you. Versus I've got my back turned, I've got my arms crossed, I'm trying to avoid this situation or tell you you're overreacting and you need to calm down. That's not going to help the situation.
Right.
Okay, so we've covered recognizing, reading, and responding. And there's a couple of other EQ skills I think that are really critical in today's world.
One of them is flexibility, and I got to tell you, Jen, this one is a struggle for me. And I think maybe this is a good place to say that EQ encompasses so many different aspects of who we are as individuals, as leaders, as members of organizations, that all of us are going to find a challenge in some area or another. Am I speaking too much? Am I not speaking enough? And I think as we look at the subject of flexibility, I immediately think about how much change comes our way every day at work and our need to be able to respond to those changes. And sometimes there's a lot of ambiguity associated with the known versus the unknown. And so I think flexibility is certainly a skill that many of us need to work on, and oftentimes, again, has to do with unexpected change coming our way. To what extent do we have the adaptability to manage effectively when unexpected things come our way? So let's
Right.
look
And
at it
jobs
as
change over time, right? It's not like
right.
the job you got hired to do today is going to be the job you'll have in probably 5 years, even if you're with the same company. So we all have to have that willingness to grow as our roles grow and change and expectations change.
So the self-assessment question here, when faced with an unexpected change, I make it a point to not overreact and keep the status quo until otherwise notified. B, I can adapt quickly. I don't lose productivity or effectiveness. And C, I lose focus on other things until I can regain control. Again, most consistent response versus what I think I should be doing.
Yes, and I can totally relate to all three of these actually. I think there's times when I'm tempted to do all of them.
I've seen you react in all of these ways, and I'm thinking I've done the same thing. I think it's a very natural human experience. And I think going back to what you talked about in the previous couple of slides with respect to self-control, once again, you can see the importance of being able to balance these EQ skills in different situations.
Yes, and one of the kind of underlying pieces of EQ that we haven't talked about is stress tolerance. And so naturally, if I can manage my stress level and I have the self-awareness to know when I need to do things to help my stress level improve, I can naturally handle unexpected change a lot better.
Right, right. So in looking at these three responses, if I look at C, for example, sometimes I do need to refocus a little bit to gain control so I don't overreact before I've had a chance to process. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. Um, I don't want to overreact. I keep the status quo, but if I keep the status quo, I may not be adapting quickly enough. So I'm thinking here, the B response, the ability to adapt more quickly, the ability to continue to be productive, even when I'm facing ambiguity, find ways to overcome those challenges that keep me from being the person that I want to be in terms of how I see myself as well as how others are seeing me.
I agree. And I think, especially in a leadership role, being able to lead others through times when it's ambiguous or unknown without people kind of getting stuck or shut down is a
Right.
key factor within leadership, too.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're going to look at optimism now, which is one of my favorite EQ skills because naturally this is a philosophy or a belief system that the future will be better than the past. Optimists tend to stay positive even despite setbacks. They don't let one bad event sort of permanently damage their sense of hope. They give people opportunity. They're risk takers. Many people think you're born an optimist, but actually you can learn to be an optimist.
I'm hearing a theme of resilience coming through in all of what you just described about optimism.
Yes, there is definitely a connection here to resiliency and not letting bad events sort of permanently change your philosophy or your risk-taking ability. I think that is one critical skill that we all need to have is the willingness to take chances and get uncomfortable, and that helps us both personally and professionally.
Right, right.
So let's look at a self-assessment question. When I'm faced with a setback, I keep pursuing what I want and believe the future will be better than the past. I think I just gave away the most emotionally intelligent answer. I am more cautious next time. I'm all for an open book test. I'm more cautious next time and plan for what could go wrong. Or C, it takes me a while to recover. Now, I guess I'll say this, even though we increase our EQ as we age, and we can dramatically increase it with concentrated effort, and I know what the most emotionally intelligent response is, I have to say I still fall victim to B because I'm a bit of a planner. And so I naturally want to think about, what can I do differently? How do I prevent this from happening next time? How do I learn? And maybe I shouldn't do that again. And so I find myself kind of getting sucked into B, even though I know A is the right answer.
Oh, I've spent a good deal of time in B myself. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Proceed with caution, as long as it doesn't impact my ability to be effective and capable. So, sometimes we do learn from the past, and it makes us look at things a little bit differently. And there may be times where it takes us a little longer to recover, but as long as we have that self-awareness, I think there's some okay in all three of these responses, as long as we don't get bound by any one of the aspects of B or C, because I definitely agree. You did give away the answer, and I totally believe it's A.
You would be right. Now, I think we're all certainly challenged by setbacks, or it's easy to sort of see the negative going on in the world today. There was an interesting study that we came across when I was working on my second book, and this one has to do with how often we treat ourselves based on our low optimism as a country. So this is a statistic in the United States between 1999 and 2012, and the number of prescribed antidepressants increased. And the range here is 30 to 100%.
Yeah.
What do you think, Steve?
Well, we've talked about it with respect to optimism, and I think there's another piece of this which we really haven't addressed in the whole emotional intelligence piece, which is the stress management aspect of who we are. Flexibility falls within that stress management piece, optimism, but it's also our ability to tolerate stress. And I think as I look at the challenges that people are facing with respect to the fast-paced environment that we've described, this is probably a higher percentage in terms of the answer than I would like to think it is. It's from 1999 to 2012, and even beyond to what we're experiencing now. I'd have to think that is well within probably the 75% range, and maybe even 100.
Yep, I'm afraid so. It's 100. It's doubled. And I agree with you. I worry from 2012 till now that it may have even doubled again.
Right.
I think we need to all take a really hard look here at our ability for coping skills and being able to manage the challenges that we face in our day-to-day life and the world around us. And as parents, be able to give our children those same coping skills. As you know, we work with higher ed, and there's times that even at the college level, I think we really try and coddle the students and make their lives as easy as possible. And I'm always kind of saying, yeah, but when they get out into the business world and they get out to jobs, no one's going to be there to kind of help them, break down all these issues and help them find their way. I mean, we have to be able to give these students and children skills so that they know how to overcome difficulty and challenge in their lives.
Right. And I think it relates too to the way we manage others, in the workplace. Am I leading people with an opportunity for them to develop their self-control skills, to develop a greater level of flexibility, to be more capable and competent in managing change? We can be there to empathize and be supportive, but at the same time, we need to encourage people to find their own strengths within themselves that will help them overcome the challenges they're facing, so that they don't become a statistic like the one we're talking about right now.
I love it. I completely agree. And I mentioned at the very beginning that we can baseline EQ by taking some assessments. And so there are several on the market that we use and recommend to others. The first one is based on that original research I mentioned in the 1980s, the EQI. It's the 2.0 version. And they actually have two different versions of this report. The assessment itself is the same. So you would go online, you would answer 133 questions about yourself, and then you would get an individual report created for you. We recommend the leadership version, of course, for anyone that's in some kind of a management role or seeks a management role, maybe a high potential, someone who will be in a management role soon. And then the workplace report, which is ideal for individual contributors or those who just want a general baseline. This report gives somebody an overall score. So you actually get a quantified score, a number of your total EQ, and then you get measured in 15 skills, several of the ones we covered today, actually, all the ones we covered today and 10 more. We also recommend a 360 version of an assessment. This is the Korn Ferry Hay Group version. This is called the ESCI, the Emotional Social Competence Inventory. This one is, as I said, a multi-rater 360, which means I not only take it myself, but I have all the people I work with take it as well. And that way I get a real clear picture of myself view compared to how everyone else sees me.
Right. And I think that it's certainly a more comprehensive viewpoint. There are advantages to any of these different reports based upon the particular situation you're dealing with. But that 360, you're right, Jen, certainly gives another viewpoint, particularly information from your peers, from your direct reports, if you have them. It can be very insightful for you to do a direct comparison between how you see yourself and how others perceive your actions.
And it's one of the really key advantages of EQ, which is it does help you sort of identify any of those blind spots we might have. You know, I always say if people have a perception of you, you might as well know what it is so you can actually do something about it versus just sort of going along hoping no news is good news.
Exactly. And I think oftentimes we talk about the distinction between the intent that I have in terms of what I'm trying to communicate versus the way people are actually perceiving what I have to say, the impact of my message. And I think that 360 can certainly give you some insight in terms of that distinction. Am I having the impact that I want to have in comparison to the intent that I have with respect to what I'm communicating?
Absolutely. We've also worked with clients and seen an increase in both team collaboration because people are more willing to hear other perspectives, and naturally with more flexibility, you'll see more collaboration happen, and the ability for someone to engage in their work. So if they can take a good look at what's motivating them and what might be missing, they can communicate that, and the organization has an opportunity to provide more engagement levers in their work.
Yeah, we're seeing a consistent message here where when people become more self-aware, more capable of understanding emotional intelligence from multiple perspectives, employee engagement goes right along with that. Because if I have a clearer understanding of who I am, what I'm looking for from myself and my organization, I become much more effective as a member of my team.
Absolutely. And we also find that people who start looking at their EQ are also more coachable. And organizations today need people who are willing to be open to the feedback, be willing to try new things even though they might not be comfortable. And that usually moves them up to the next level of productivity and effectiveness. And I think in your example that you started with, Steve, wasn't one of those two promoted?
That's exactly right. JD became actually the supervisor over Frank because it reached a point where the organization realized not only did he have effective technical skills, but he had the ability to communicate not only with people outside his team, but to lead Frank in a better direction with respect to his career.
Mm-hmm. We see it all the time. And you can also take this competency and apply it when you're hiring. So even though we can teach EQ and you can learn EQ, if we can hire somebody with EQ, let's take that approach. So being able to interview for emotional intelligence, ask questions that reveal the candidate's self-awareness, self-control, flexibility, et cetera, is a real key benefit to this. Certainly team development, so including EQ within any other curriculum you might be offering or as part of a team building activity, you can include some EQ in it. conflict management. So sometimes we see teams that are just chronically challenged, and instead of giving them conflict management training, or maybe you've tried that and it didn't work, we find that EQ, as you raise your awareness of yourself and your impact on others, you take more accountability for that behavior, and therefore conflict tends to go down. And then coaching, which is another great strategy for developing these skills. We also have a lot of other resources available. This is naturally a huge topic, and we have provided articles out on my blog, Shirkani's Musings. If you Google search that, you will find it. And we have a newsletter that comes out every month that you're welcome to join as well. It's the Performance Pointer, we call it. And you can text the word monthly to the number 22828, and it will ask you for your email address, and then you'll get added to our mailing list. And once a month, you'll get an article. We do have a lot of archived articles, though, at the blog. So if you're interested in learning more about this topic and ways to apply it, there's plenty of resources there. And if you'd like more information about anything we've talked about today, please feel free to contact Angela.
Exactly. We've talked a lot about emotional intelligence today, but there are certainly a lot of other webinar topics that are all woven within the context of emotional intelligence. And if you've got any questions, by all means, get in contact with Ange. She can give you information about those webinars, assessment information that we talked about a little bit ago, and also other services we provide here at Penumbra.
All right. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn. We're all three there. I have many of my articles that we post on my LinkedIn page. So if you follow me there, you'll get copies of those as well. Steve is also on LinkedIn, and so is Angela. So feel free to connect with us. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear feedback on what you think of this webinar. And if you have other resources that you're looking for, we're happy to help you find those too. It's been a